Okay, so we'll take questions from the floor. Excuse me, if you could keep your questions brief and succinct, and we'll do a tag team, and then we'll let you know in about 20 minutes.
What would be your top priority for investing more in kids here in Virginia if you were given the opportunity to be in the lieutenant governor?
Whichever one. Yeah, no, a great question, and you know, I mentioned a couple. Can everybody hear? Would you all like us to use the mic?
Use the mic.
All right, sounds good. You know, I mentioned a couple of those things. I've pretty much dedicated my life to taking care of children, and so there are a couple of fronts that I think we can work on. Again, the first is health care, and I talked about Medicaid expansion. You know, believe it or not, at Children's Hospital where I work, about 55% of our patient population is Medicaid. And so we need to strengthen that system. And by the way, in this expansion program that I helped write with Barbara Favola up here, we have a lot of good reform in that as well. And that's something that, you know, we should talk about as well. But all children in the Commonwealth should have access to quality health care. The next is education. And I already talked about the pre-K. Again, you can pay for it now or you can pay for it later. It has to be a priority. We need to make sure that all Virginia children have access to pre-K education. The technical and vocational training is very important. And, you know, Aneesh and I, we haven't talked about it, but, you know, our colleges and universities, I teach at the medical school. We have students coming from a lot of different countries. They're not playing for second. So education is key. And, you know, as Aneesh said, we're going to be in session during January and February. There are a lot of things that we can work on in the off session. So certainly with my background in healthcare, that's a priority, as is education. The last thing that I would just mention very briefly, we need to make the Commonwealth of Virginia safer for our children. As you all have heard, I served in Desert Storm. I know what these assault weapons do to human beings. I've taken care of children at the bedside who are victims of gunshot wounds. There is no excuse that here in the Commonwealth we shouldn't have universal background checks. We do not need assault weapons, military-style weapons with these high-volume clips, and we desperately need better access to mental health for those children that are mentally ill. So a lot of things in that area that we can work on, but those would be some of my priorities in taking care of our children.
Thank you so much, Ralph. And you'll hear a very similar theme. So Paul, I'll just say them in 3 simple ways. Number one, there's no doubt, and Ralph mentioned this, the New York Times, by the way, did a piece last week. The educational gap has expanded by 40% between those who come from privileged families and those from our poorest families. The gap hasn't shrunk, it's grown in terms of educational performance, and the single biggest factor is the difference in investments in pre-K. Ralph and I, and my wife and I both, have invested in pre-K for our own kids. God bless the two of us with means so we can afford to do that. But that's not right and it's not fair that we're given, you know, my daughter just started kindergarten, and in the first month you take the first standardized exam, and it's called the PALS. You know this? Yeah, they do high-stakes testing in kindergarten. But anyway, the point is, the gap is already seen. You already see it in kindergarten. You know, at the White House we had a study that showed families in Beverly Hills have about 150 books per child, and in Watts, just a few miles down the way, it's like 0.5. So you just know, substantively, we've got to get investments in health, in education. But here's the example of investment resources. The legislature is one source of resources, but remember, President Obama put up $400 million in a competitive grant for early learning. Mark Sickles, did Virginia win? No, of course not. I don't even think we applied. I'm just being honest, because I think basically it was President Obama, and so, no, we don't like President Obama, so they just didn't do it. So it's frustrating, because that's $400 million of capital. Other states that won got 25 to 50 million to invest in their pre-K. On health, the single biggest challenge we face is that for kids that are growing up with learning disabilities or have difficulty early, we don't do a good job. The healthcare system today is emphasizing after you're sick how we treat you. And again, Ralph and I agree, we need to shift the system to focus more on prevention and wellness. And again, Virginia, before I left the White House, I said, $1 billion innovation challenge. Wrote a big blog post at the White House. Who's got a great idea to change the healthcare system and make it work better for families? $1 billion opportunity. How many Virginian entities applied to make it easier? Again, I'm not going to make us feel bad about all this, but you can go down the riff. But I have a third one, Paul. The third one is public safety. One of my proudest accomplishments at the White House was the National Wireless Initiative. This is going to invest over the next 5 years $7 billion to ensure cops and firefighters have interoperable communications to 98% of the country. And we are going to spend that money over the next 5 years, and states have to help implement. The profile of a missing child is a 12-year-old girl. If you do not find her within 3 hours, you will not find her. And because cops don't have the same smartphone, tablet, fancy, real-time opportunity, they're using analog radios, we are missing precious time, losing precious time, which could be better spent finding where those kids are and saving families. So I want to make sure that we implement that better than we've done on the other two failures by missing opportunity, and that will mean public safety, healthcare, and education. Thank you.
Thank you, John.
I have a very short question. You're both running for lieutenant governor, and the first time I ever heard of a lieutenant governor was when Bowling decided not to run. So, what can you do as lieutenant governor to do any of the stuff you're talking about? I think it's all great stuff, but how do you get it implemented?
Please.
Yeah, no, that's a good question. And I think people have said before, after Aneesh and I have spoken, say, well, you all haven't even told us what the lieutenant governor does. So anyway, we both, we Googled it last night. We're prepared to talk about it. I think having been in the Senate for 6 years, the most important job of the lieutenant governor, believe it or not, is to preside over the Senate. And you know, if you've never had the chance to come into the Senate, we are very traditional. It's a great place. Well, anyway, the lieutenant governor does preside and kind of moves things forward efficiently. They welcome guests to the Senate chamber. And I will tell you, I've watched him for 6 years. Bill Bolin, I don't agree with his politics, but he has done a very good job presiding over the Senate. And then, you know, as we said, a couple other things, that the lieutenant governor also, you know, every morning I plan to just put a little mirror under the governor's nose and make sure he's still well. It's good to have a doctor in the house. But then, you know, as we've been talking, there are other things that we can do to move the Commonwealth forward. And just the things that we feel passionate about, we'll do in the off-season. I mean, for me, with my background in healthcare, certainly work with the Secretary of Health to work on things, to make sure that we posture Virginia in a good position so that all Virginians can have access to quality health care. Work with the Secretary of Education on education matters. You know, I talked about the gun violence issue. So there are a lot of projects that, you know, we can be involved in when we're not in session. But anyway, that's a good question you ask, and that's hopefully that's what I read last night. So
that's right. Thank you so much. By the way, can I just say, we have a lot of fun together. That was the funniest I've seen you in a while. You got 3 more. He's good to go. Holiday Inn Express. Okay. So, thank you. Okay. Let me amplify a little bit of where Ralph was. So, the tie-breaking vote in the Senate is unique in this moment in Virginia history, which is that other senators are not up for re-election, so we literally will have that vote and that authority coming in on January of 2014. But let me just make a personal observation. In the Kaine administration, Governor Kaine appointed me to the Council on Virginia's Future. He had 2 cabinet picks, myself and Jody Wagner, who was his Secretary of Finance. And that's the body that had been charged with making sure that Virginia moves forward as a best managed state. Governor Kaine really turned to the council to make sure that we had a long-term roadmap, essentially traditionally a bipartisan roadmap on making Virginia work better. And as lieutenant governor, I am by law a member of that council. So essentially, I'd go back to the role that I had as a member of the board on that council. Now, what did I do when I was on the council the first time? I chaired the Effectiveness and Efficiency Committee, and I sparked what's called the Productivity Investment Fund. Governor Kane allowed us to invest $3 million on the most promising ideas. Some called it like government venture capital. We invested $100,000 to reinvest, to redesign the GED program in Southwest Virginia, and Governor McDonnell liked the results so much he took it statewide. We spent a little over $100,000 to reduce preterm birth rates in the Shenandoah Valley by doing a telemedicine pilot with UVA. Governor McDonnell liked that so much he signed into law a telemedicine initiative for the entire state. We made investments in new skills for kids, as Ralph mentioned, about skills for not just four-year degrees, but those who want to get credentials in the economy. Prince William Schools, Chuck Drake, a teacher, had an idea. Could we teach kids to refurbish computers and then give the refurbished computers to families that are on free and reduced lunch? We put $100,000 behind that program, and Governor McDonnell liked it so much he added $500,000 to take that statewide, or $400,000. So that productivity fund has been endorsed by Governor McDonnell. It still exists, and it has a cycle of making Virginia better by giving us the chance to try new ideas. It's got over 40 initiatives that it's funded since its launch. As Lieutenant Governor, I'll go right back to that body and ensure that we use that vehicle to invest smartly in new concepts. And that, by the way, isn't limited just to state investments. We could better organize applications to all these federal grants that we've missed over the last several years. And the Lieutenant Governor can be a very helpful voice in making sure that we have a best proposal going in to bring those ideas out. Last point, when I left the White House, or just before I left, we launched Startup Virginia, a public-private partnership that takes no taxpayer dollars. Steve Case and I launched it right up the way at George Mason in Arlington. We now have over 600 startups who've connected to over $1 billion of resources to help them grow. As Lieutenant Governor, I intend to embrace Startup Virginia and celebrate its successes, knock down barriers where possible, and create support for growth opportunities in markets that I think are poised to make Virginia a leader, not just in the country, but around the world. Modernizing the healthcare system, energy, and education systems will mean new startups that will thrive in that new environment. So I intend these three things to happen. 21st vote, focus on the Council on Virginia's Future, and then embrace these collaboratives like Startup Virginia to grow the economy. Thank you.
Nick Penton, Falls Church News Press. You just said that there are no Senate races up this year, is that correct?
That's correct.
All right, well then, the question of what a Lieutenant Governor does, you're the 21st Senator.
Yes, sir.
So, I mean, I really don't think most people know that.
You said it better than us. Thank you for that. Yes, you're right.
So, I don't know if you want to amplify or whatever.
How about we mix it up? How about Dorothy?
Okay.
Hi there, thank you. Dorothea Peters from Alexandria. And I'm so proud as a Democrat that I have such two fine